Hi, this is Amber from the A Team. Welcome to Google Drawings, the power of creativity. We're going to be spending some time going over what is Google Drawings and how can I use it. So first of all, Google Drawings is an app that's built into the other apps as well as a standalone app that you can use to create so many different things. You can use it for drawing, for text, for annotation. There's limitless ideas. We often say that the limit to Google Drawings is your imagination because it can be used in so many different ways. So the first thing that we want to go over is how to access the Google Drawings app, and there's several different ways. So I'm going to navigate over to my Drive, and in my Drive I have my New button. I could go to More and add Google Drawings that way. You'll notice this is kind of in the More category, just like Google Forms. It's not one of the top three, but you can get to it by going to More. Also, if you are in a document or a slide or a sheet, either way, doc slides or sheets, and you're inside, perhaps you're typing in something and you want to add a Google drawing, you can also go to the Insert menu and you will find Drawing. So you can insert drawings into the main apps as well as just create a Google drawing right in your Google Drive. The third way that you can get to drawings is by opening up a browser and going to drawings.google.com, and that will immediately open up a canvas for you to begin creating your Google drawing. So let's kind of get started in looking at the interface and the kinds of things that are available to us. And while I'm going through this, I want you to be thinking this is something that you could use for concept mapping, creating of logos, any kind of basic graphics creation. This is a great canvas for you to use. Sketchpad, we've even seen some people using this sort of as a whiteboard, so to speak. And just like the other Google tools, it is able to be edited simultaneously with multiple people. So it's something that more than one person can be creating as well. So be thinking about that and keep that in the back of your mind as we go through how to use the tools. So we talked about how to create. You can use the New button, create it inside a Google Doc, and you can also just go to drawings.google.com and get there as well. You'll notice in my document here, if I did choose to insert a drawing, it opens up a smaller area, and as soon as I'm finished and save and close it, it will go into the document. And we'll look at that a little bit later. So what I want to do first is walk through this interface with you and talk to you about the tools at the top and some of the different formats that you can use. The first thing that you notice is that you get this great transparent canvas. A lot of times when you're creating images, you have to add transparency later, so it's nice that you start with a transparent canvas, and you can keep it transparent if you wish, or you can add some background colors, and we'll look at that too. So let's look at the main tools across the top. You have the print icon, so if you want to print your creation when you're finished, you have your undo and redo buttons as well. You also have the zoom tool if you want to zoom into your creation. If you're creating something really small on your canvas, you have that ability. Now the select tool is the main tool that allows you to click and move things and choose things, so that arrow icon is there as well. There's also the line tool. So let's look at some of the lines you can create. You can create straight lines, arrows, elbow connectors, and curved connectors. You can also make different curves, polylines, or scribbles. So it just depends on what you're creating in terms of which line you choose to use. And we'll make some of those lines in a moment. Our next tool is the shape tool, and you'll notice that under each of these there's a variety of others. These are very similar to some of the ones that you've seen in other types of apps where you can insert shapes, but there are various different types of shapes, arrows, callouts, and equation tools under the shape tool. The next one is your text box. That of course gives you the crosshair to draw a text box. And also there's the ability to insert an image into your canvas, and you'll see why that might be a tool you want to use later. Then you have the comment tool, so if you were working collaboratively, this works just exactly the same as it does in the other main Google apps, where you can insert a comment in a particular place in your drawing. So let's look at some of the things that I can do to my image. First of all, let's look at drawing a line. So I'm going to choose just a standard line so you can see. You get the crosshair. You can draw your line. And once you've drawn it, you get these extra tools across the top where you can change your color. So if you want a different type of color line, you can also choose your thickness. And then you can choose the style of line. Did you need it to be a dotted line? So you can choose those things as well. Also, if you meant to choose arrow, but you already chose line, you don't have to delete this and go back and choose the arrow. You can actually add beginning and ending parts to your line here as well. So this tool, the line tool, will stay active, and it will continue to use what you just chose until you go back up and you change it back to the select tool. And then once you have your select tool, then you can manipulate objects. Now, once you have an object inserted, you do get the corners, so you can change things about your shape. And because this is an arrow, I can actually move it around. I can move it as well as change the orientation sort of by spinning it. So different things that you can do with arrows. I'm going to click on that and delete them and look at some of the other tools. There are some connectors. So if you had two things you wanted to connect, you can use a connector line. This is super helpful if you're doing any sort of concept mapping, or if you're doing some sort of flow chart. This is super helpful so that you can join things together. And I'll actually put another line here so you can see how this works, and I'll make it a little thicker. Remember, I get my weight here, the weight line. I'm going to go back and choose my connector, and you can see that I can join those two shapes, and I can use the yellow to change things about my line. Maybe I want it to come down here and then have the bend. So there are different things that you can do with those connector lines as well. Your curved connector works the same way. A curve is going to give me the ability to click in multiple areas and curve this around. So I can kind of choose my curve, and when I'm finished, I double click and it's a line. So now I have this curved line that I can move around, as well as change the size of it by the sides. I can squeeze it, or I can just resize it by dragging on the corner. So that's our curved line. The polyline enables me to make shapes that may have different edges. So if I wanted to try to draw this line here, notice how it closes it in. And I'll go up and get my cursor. And then on some shapes, you're going to get this little extra spin tool, so if you needed to spin it around. So you can see how you could have students creating shapes if you're studying about shapes, and the polyline does automatically fill in if you touch the corners, both edges. Then you have your scribble tool, which works just like it says. You can scribble, but once you've done your scribbling, then your scribble becomes something that you can move and manipulate. So then you can get some really creative shapes with your scribbles. So those are all different kinds of lines. I'm going to clean off our palette here, and our canvas rather, and get rid of some of these things so that we can look at. Let's look at our next tool with shapes. So here you can do all sorts of different types of shapes. So if I wanted to make a shape, notice this default is this blue. Not sure why that's the default, but the default is always this light blue. Anytime you want to change the fill, you can go up to the paint can and you can change your fill color. And you can also go to custom and put in your code. If you know exactly the hex number that you want to use, you can make it match if you were trying to do something that would match your website. So that you've got your fill tool that you can change the fill. You can also change the color of the line. So if I wanted it to have a blue outline, you can change your line color and your fill color, as well as changing the weight of the lines. And just like we did before, you can also change that style of line. Now with the shapes comes something extra. You can actually double click inside the shape and you'll notice I get some text tools because each of the shapes comes with the ability to type inside of it, which makes this a great little tool. So if you're wanting to create something here, centering it, and I can change my size, and now I have something that's movable that has words inside it. So that will be a great tool that you can use, and when you see some ideas of how to use that later, it's a great thing to use. You can also use a numbered list or bulleted list and work on some indentations as well. The other thing you'll notice is when I have this selected, I also have the ability to insert a link. Maybe when they clicked on this, I wanted it to take them somewhere. So this, as long as it stays in its Google Drawing format, this might be a button that takes them somewhere else. So that you do have that linking option as well. So those are shapes, and they all work very much the same way, where you just take your shape, draw your shape, and then you've got some different tools that you can use as long as it's selected. I do like when it's not selected, I have a simpler menu. When it is selected, I see exactly what I can do with that shape. Now that I have the ability here, I'm going to use some of the elbow connectors on these shapes, and you'll notice with shapes the elbow connectors work a little differently. So if I approach a shape, notice it gets these little purple dots. That means if I click here and I attach it to something else, notice I get the purple dots, it will immediately connect to that shape, and depending on what side I choose, notice the line changes, which I think is kind of neat. So if you're having your students make any sort of diagrams or charts, the connector tool is kind of cool. That also means as long as I have them connected, when I move that shape, then that line is going to move with it. So the connector lines are fun, especially if you feel like you might do some manipulation later. So that's your connector line. Now, the last thing that you have here is your text box. And notice you can use a shape to put your text inside of, but if you just wanted to add some text, you just simply click on your text tool and click into the drawing, or you can actually draw your text box. So as you're typing your text, you can move this text box around. This makes it a great labeling tool if you want to do some labeling, but now it's movable. So it works the same way as the shapes in that you have all those tools, text tools and hyperlink and different alignment tools to use as well. The difference in a text box is when you make it, it's automatically transparent. So if you wanted to drag it on top of something, you could. But with the shapes, those are going to have a fill unless you reset them. So speaking of layering things, if I have several things on top of each other, so here's my text that I've done, and I did that first, but if I go and I draw another shape, the layering works so that as you're creating things, in the order that you create them, the most recent one is going to be on the top. So sometimes you may create your text and forget that, I want to drag this on top. Since I created the text after, it's going to be on top here, but if I take it here, it's going to be behind. So one of the other tools that you have at the top is arrange. So you can actually change your order. So maybe I want to bring that text to the front, and so I can change the order there. So it's important that you know the arrange tool. The other thing that you have for you is that maybe I want to select all of these things, and notice I did that by just starting at the corner and drawing a box around it, and everything is selected, and you notice as long as they're selected I can move them together. You also have the ability to center things on the page. So I centered them one way, but I can also center them vertically so that this is actually in the center of my page, so I don't have to guess about my alignment. One of the other things that you noticed is the ability to group. Maybe I want to group these two things together, so that means now this is like one object, so wherever I move it, they go together. So that works very similar to some other tools that you've probably used where you can group things together. You also have the rotate tool, and the rotate tool allows you to flip things. Maybe you are doing something on symmetry and you need them to be able to make a copy and flip something a different way, so you can flip horizontally and vertically. You can also immediately rotate 90 degrees counter and clockwise, but you can also use this little tool to drag this around. And one of the things I like about this tool is you'll notice as I'm dragging, I get the percentage of angle that I'm spinning it. So this can also turn into sort of like a math lesson here of our percentage of angle. So all of those things were under the arrange area. Again, with resizing, you drag from the corner if you want to resize the whole thing. If you want to elongate or distort it by making it wider or thinner, or taller or shorter, you can also do that as well. But dragging from the corner is going to keep it in its orientation, and it's going to just scale it down. So we've done a text box. Let's look at the last option, the image option. You can upload an image for your computer. You can search it in your Google Drive. You can look at recent ones that were uploaded. So any sort of image that you've made that you might want to insert. So maybe I have this duck here that I want to insert. I can also put actual photos here. If you're doing this with students and you're having them insert images, you can go into Google search, and you'll notice that results that are shown are for commercial reuse with modification. So if they search from here, it's like doing an advanced search for copyright-free images. So you will notice that as you do a search, so if I wanted to look for dog here, I'm going to get only things that are labeled for commercial use, and then I can also decide what type of drawing I want. So if I'm able to put something in my image, in my Google drawing, these are going to be ones that are free to use and modify. So that's that image tool. So let's look at the insert menu. We've already inserted text boxes and images by using the shortcut tools, but there is the ability to insert a chart. Now, if you already have a chart created in Sheets, you can pull it straight from Sheets, but you can also choose different kinds of charts here. And when you insert the chart, then it's going to be just a generic chart that you're going to have to actually go into and manipulate. So to manipulate it, you can go to Open in Sheets, and you can change the data there. So you can insert a chart that way, or you could just insert it from Sheets. The other option you have here that's not in that shortcut menu is word art. For word art, I'm just going to put sample word art here. Notice it says enter your text and then click enter. And when you click enter, it puts it into this word art format, which you notice has a fill and a line. You can change your font style. So if I wanted this to be a little bit different, so I want this to be a little bit different font. Maybe I want a different color on the inside there, and maybe I want a different color on the line, and maybe I want to make it thicker or thinner. That doesn't look very good. So you can use some word art as well, especially if you wanted to do some titling. So that's under Insert, and that's Insert Word Art. The lines and the shapes are the same ones that we saw on the shortcut menu. Table is something new. Maybe you needed to add a table to your drawing. That does exactly that. You'll notice that the table is transparent unless you choose to fill it with color, and I can choose here to fill it with certain colors. But you can make a table right in your drawing. So you can end up using this as a very versatile tool. So all of those are under the Insert menu. Let's go over to the File menu and let's look at some of the things that you can do with File. Now, you have the ability to share, which is the same share button that's over on the right. And you can do some of the things that you normally have been able to do in your other Google files. But what I want you to see is you do have revision history, even on a Google drawing. So if you're working on this in a collaborative group, you'll be able to see who made the most recent changes. And if something happened to the drawing, you'll be able to see where the mistake happened. I want to show you the Download As option because this is where it can be super versatile. Just like with the other Google tools, you can download this as a PDF, but some of the other power of this is that you can also download it as a JPEG or a PNG, which are some standard image formats. So if you needed to use it somewhere else, you can actually save it as an image. So maybe you wanted to download it and use it somewhere else for some other reason on a website or whatever, you have the ability to do that. And if you have created something that you needed to be a scalable or vector graphic, there is the SVG format as well. But typically we see that people use JPEG or PNG. The other option that you have that's also available in the other Google tools is to publish to the web. And this can be super helpful if you're wanting to insert this image into a website, but you may make changes to it later. It will, if you publish it to the web, it will give it a URL, but if I come back to this drawing and make changes, it's going to update it as I go when I republish it. So that's kind of a neat tool to use as well. You can email it as an attachment. You can also email anybody that is a collaborator on this file. This is a quick way to email anybody that has collaboration rights. Now, I do want to look at document details for a moment because that shows you who the owner is, when it was last modified, and where it's living in your drive. Under page setup, you have the ability to sort of change the type of page. It does come as a standard page, but you also, I want to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen. There is a little triangle that has several lines. You can actually change the size of your canvas, and notice when I changed the size, it didn't actually change the size of the things on the canvas. So in this particular instance, that would be a really bad idea. But I could perhaps drag it wider if I needed to put some things over on the side, and if I needed to make it longer, I can also drag it down. So you can actually change the size of your canvas. But if you needed to create an image a very particular size, as soon as you created the drawing, if you came to page setup, you could actually put in a custom range by either inches or pixels. There's centimeters and points as well, but typically inches and pixels are what we've used. So if you needed something for a website and it had to be, 720 pixels wide and so many pixels tall, you could actually make your canvas fit that particular requirement by going under the page setup. So those are some things that are under the File menu. There are also some other things that you can do with this as well. One of the things that I use sometimes is my web clipboard, because sometimes I will just copy an image and paste it in. So if I'm somewhere else doing something else, for example, this other drawing that I had here, I could select it and copy it and just go to the drawing and paste it. So you do have the ability to copy and paste pictures in, text, and other goodies that you can put in. And if it's from drawing to drawing, it works really well, but you can also paste in images as well. So that's something that's under your edit menu. You can also zoom in and zoom out. We kind of talked about that. And we can also use some guides or grids if you need to snap to, which means you want it to snap to being aligned. You can do that as well. The other thing that I wanted to show you is that you have the ability by right-clicking on your canvas to go to background and change the background color. So if you wanted your background to not be transparent, you can actually choose background and either customize the color, or you can actually choose for it to be a color. Depending on what you're going to use your image for, you may or may not want to use background color. That's just up to you and what you're using your image for. Now, one of the other things that I did want to show you before we move on to some ideas is how to do some masking. Masking is a great tool that you can use for images. So I'm going to double click on my image, and what I want you to see is when I double click I get some cropping options. So maybe I want to crop out a little bit of my image here. So I can use a cropping tool. So if I only wanted that tiny part of the dog, I could do that as well. And notice when I double click it, the rest of the image is still there. So if I wanted to reset it, I could. There's also the ability when you have an image selected to reset the image from here. And that's just going to remove all the different things that you did to the image. You can also replace the image if you have something selected and you chose the wrong one. You can go to replace and go back to your menu and find a different one. There's also the image options button, and if I click that, it's going to open up over to the right, and there are a few options that you have here. You can do some recoloring, not really filters, but just some recoloring. That poor puppy. So you can use your recoloring options, but this is particularly helpful if you're wanting to do black and white, for instance. You can also change the transparency of items just a little bit, especially if you had some layered together and you wanted them to kind of wrap over each other. You can do some transparency. You can also change your brightness. So if you needed it, if you have a particularly dark image and you needed to lighten it, and you can also fool with the contrast a little bit and create some really neat things. And you can also reset everything if you want to by going to your reset image and getting it back the way it was. So that's another option that you have is to play with your image while it's in your Google Drawing. So let's talk about how to mask an image, and masking means fitting an image into a particular shape. So let's say I want this dog to be in the shape of a heart. So I can actually go up to my crop tool and notice there's a little arrow there, and I can actually choose whatever shape I wanted it to be. And I can actually do some editing here to fit it in a little better. So I can double click on it and move it around if I needed to get the puppy into a little bit different place. Maybe I don't want his head sticking out there. So now I have my little puppy in a heart shape. So again, you click on the image and you go up to the crop tool, but instead of choosing crop, you go to the arrow, and then you can choose a shape and make your animal be into that shape. Again, double clicking on the image is going to enable you to pull that animal around. So single clicking moves the whole shape. Double clicking allows you to move the shape within the shape. So you can do some fun graphics using the masking tool. Okay, so now that we've gone through all these different things that you can do, we've kind of given you a smattering of just how to use the tool itself. But what we want to do now is kind of walk you through some of the ideas for what you can actually do and what you can have your students do with Google Drawings. So we're going to look at some samples of some things that might give you some inspiration on what you can do. One of the things that you can do is use Google Drawings to create annotations. Here you see there's a piece of software and we're trying to point out the different areas in the software. So if you needed your students to annotate something, they could put an image and use the arrow tools and the text box tools to be able to annotate different things in a particular image. So that's using some annotation. Now you also have the ability to do some maps or graphic organizers. So here is one that we created by just putting an image in the background of a book. And you'll notice here in the middle, you've got some different text boxes that you could create a template, and using Google Classroom or using the copy function on the end of the URL, you could share this with students and they have to come in and change the title, the author, and fill in some information. So this is more of a digital type of graphic organizer. Here's another one. This is a character profile. So they're trying to make this be like your character that's in the story we just read. And so you have the ability to add some things in, change it, and make it for your character in your book. So you can use some graphic organizers to kind of help with this. Something else that you can do, here's an activity that the teacher could create. So in this sample, it tells them make a copy and name your copy the shape that you're going to try to make. So these are actually tangrams that are movable. So the students could move these and try to make these three shapes with the tangrams. So then you're ending up making virtual manipulatives that are customizable that you're able to make your own activities with. So this is another idea for using shapes and having the ability to move things around. Okay, so this next tool uses the drag and drop function that is so versatile with Google Drawings. You can really make some great activities for this. Now, this is a very simple explanation of how you might use it, but if you wanted, especially with younger students or ELL or EC, you could use some drag and drop activities where you have some categories and they're actually trying to decide, in this case, are they oviparous or viviparous? So they could drag and drop the animals inside the shapes and then send this back to you, which gives you the ability to do some dragging and dropping so that they can practice. And this is an activity you could make as a template, and then they can make their own copies either through Google Classroom or the copy URL trick. So let's go back and let's look at, here is a labeling activity. So in this particular activity, we've got some vocabulary on the left, the jobs on the right, and we have an image in the middle. And so we're using arrows to label the parts of the plant, and on the right, we're using arrows to connect the part to its role. And so then the student would be able to use the line tool, and they could use the line tool to make drawings on the paper so that they can show their understanding of the different parts of the plant. So that's an idea of labeling. Another idea is this is just an idea board. There are a lot of online kind of corkboard, sticky note sites, but you could also do a simpler version in an activity in your classroom by having them write down some things on the sticky notes using the shapes and add it to a corkboard. This is just an image in the background that we've used for the back of the corkboard. So that's just sort of an idea board that you could use for vocabulary or other things. You can also give assignments where, for example, you have students create things. Like this is a family crest, and they had to do some research on different things and find different images to represent their family crest, and then they're using these labeling bubbles to label different things on the crest. So this could be an actual activity that you have the students creating something that they're turning into you, a crest, a logo, different kinds of things like that. Infographics, there's lots of online infographic makers, but you could actually make the students make their own infographics. So this is a simple one about coffee, but you see how you could use the simple tools that are within Google Drawings to make sort of a poster. Here we have a timeline. Timelines are awesome to be able to show understanding, but also to be able to see things in a linear perspective. So you could actually use images and connector tools and text boxes to have your students create a timeline. So this is something that would be a neat creation to have them make. Now, here's an alternative use to Google Drawings. You could use this for math activities where you're having a math problem at the top and they have to actually show their work. So this is a way that you could have them give them an area at the bottom where they have to actually show their work. So this is a different idea for using Google Drawings for math. This next one is using hotspots, and hotspots are areas of an image that actually link to something else. So as long as this stays in Google Drawings, one of the things that you can do is, I'm going to zoom in on this map so that you can see how this is going to work. So I've zoomed in on this map that we found online, and we're trying to link some information to the map. You'll notice there's a box here, and with the box there's actually a URL associated with that. So I can actually make this picture in Google, and I'm going to zoom back out so that you can see it. I can actually make this link somewhere that will go to a particular website. So this goes to a website about Vienna. So you can see how I can use shapes and make them link, and that was using that linking tool that we looked at before. So if there's something on there that you want to link to, you can create a hotspot on an image. So that's kind of fun to be able to use Google Drawings in an interactive sort of way as well. So let's go back to Google Docs and using it with other apps. I can actually go here and insert a drawing into my document. Let's say, let's make a real simple something here. Let's say I wanted to label something. We're going to make this super simple. This is a triangle. So here's my image, and I click Save, and that image is actually in my document, and I can choose to wrap it or break it so that it fits into my document. Just to kind of show you how this works. So if I've made this wrap, wherever I put it, the text is going to wrap around it. So you see how I can put images in my document using Google Drawings. This is a really versatile way to add graphics into your documents, your presentations, and your sheets. So if I needed to edit this, double click on it, it opens right in Google Drawings, and I can change it. So if I wanted to put this label here, hit save, it automatically updates it into the document, and you're able to resize it and do whatever it is that you need to do. So I hope you see the versatility of this tool. It can be used as a standalone, and it can be used as something that adds to one of the other main Google apps. But what I hope that you'll do is explore Google Drawings, create some things, Think about making templates that you share with your students either in Google Classroom or just sharing it via email or with the share tool, the share button at the top. Also think about having students collaborate on creating something in Google Docs. This is an awesome way to use a tool that's really a lot of people don't know a lot about or haven't used it very much in tons of different ways. So explore Google Drawings, have fun, create something new, create something special, make it with your students, have your students using it to create some things, and share with us some of your ideas of how you used Google Drawings. Thank you.